Everyone, thank you so much for joining. We'll get started and everyone can continue to join. But we're so excited to host this end of year New York City budget briefing with none other than the New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. So before we begin, I just want to make a plug to put questions in the chat. We will address them at the end after the presentation. We're so grateful for the comptroller for joining us and for moderator and ABNY YP steering committee member Shane Myers for hosting. Please share the ABNY message, add a better NY on all social media accounts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shane to introduce our speaker. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see so many people joining us this morning for a great presentation from Comptroller Stringer. I'm Shane Myers, an analyst at OMB, supervising DOT's $19 billion capital portfolio. I was excited to have the chance to host this event today for a couple of reasons. One, as Sarah mentioned, I serve on ABNY's Young Professional Steering Committee and know these events are a great resource for young professionals to learn from the top policymakers on so many issues vital to the health of New York City. And two, Comptroller Stringer gave me my first opportunity in city government when I interned for him at the Borough President's office. My signature achievement there, and possibly of all time, which the Comptroller may remember, was hitting the game-winning home run against then-Comptroller Lou's softball team in a one Center Street rivalry game. Comptroller Stringer was the winning pitcher that evening, joining his other accomplishments of serving the Upper West Side for 13 years in the New York State Assembly, becoming the Manhattan Borough President in 2006, and being elected Comptroller in 2013. As Comptroller, Mr. Stringer is the Chief Financial Officer of New York, safeguarding more than $250 billion in pension investments. Today, we will hear Comptroller Stringer speak about the $103 billion FY22 budget and discuss the fiscal outlook of New York City as we continue to recover and rebuild from the pandemic. Comptroller Stringer has dedicated his career to public service, has fought for decades to make New York a better place. It's a true honor to introduce Comptroller Stringer. Comptroller Stringer, the Zoom is now yours.
Thank you, Shane. And let me start out by just saying you did hit the winning home run. You know, we were the underdogs in that famous game. The Borough President's office only has 55 employees, and the Comptroller's office has 788. So John Liu had a broader bench and was considered the heavy favorite in that game. And it was brutal. Sliding into home plate, I realized that this is some of the craziest thing. I thought I was going to die during that day, but you came through and hit the winning pitch. And I just want to say, if Eric Adams is listening today, I expect for you to have a very important position in OMB because you've got a great future ahead of you. So I'm really glad that you are the introducer today. So thank you, and it's great to see you. And I am really glad to also be with all of you this morning because let's face it, you are the future of this great city. And I believe that by coming on to Zooms like this and participating in ABNY, you will have the years in civic life that I think will change your life and helpfully push the city forward. You know, ABNY has always been an esteemed organization dating back to the fiscal crisis in the 70s. And it still is relevant today, even more so, because ABNY has taken an opportunity to not just bring together people in business and civic life and not-for-profits, but ABNY understands that the future is who's coming after us. And that's why Stephen Rubenstein and Melvin Miller have really built this organization, and I'm very proud of it. And I think there's a lot that you're going to have to do in the next few years. And now we need you because we have to construct a strong, vibrant, and equitable economy for the future. Many of you, myself included, we've just lived through an unprecedented moment in our city's history. We've had tragic losses of lives and livelihoods. And today, we have a unique opportunity to build a more reinvigorated, more equitable, dynamic New York City. The city budget is the vehicle for setting those priorities and putting in place the programs that will help turn those priorities into concrete realities for all New Yorkers. So what I want to do today is talk to you about where we are right now and the decisions that we will face as new city leadership comes to the forefront. But let's just for a moment look back a little bit. It's not that long ago that our economy and our tax revenues appeared to be in free fall. A year and a half ago, the state and the city had shut down all non-essential businesses and issued stringent stay-at-home or orders in order to fight COVID-19 and protect the public. Employment fell by 900,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate skyrocketed to 20%. This was not akin to the Great Recession in 2008. This was the Great Depression. These were depression level numbers. And as a result, we expected a huge shortfall in revenues, nearly $16 billion less compared to projections I made just a few months earlier. $16 billion. Now, believe it or not, a year later, we were able to certify a balanced budget for fiscal year 2022. And that is, thanks in part to an unprecedented infusion of emergency federal assistance and much better revenues than we expected. And anyone who thinks the federal government does not have New York's future in its hands, just look at the difference between Biden and Trump. So let me just take you through the budget right now. Altogether, the budget as passed was $98.7 billion. And as usual, the biggest share of the budget goes to pre-K through 12 education, $28 billion spent this year on education. Next is social services, including our share of Medicaid and public assistance. That makes up another $16 billion. And public safety, police, fire, corrections accounts for $10 billion. Now, of course, the federal stimulus funds are a big part of the current budget. Altogether, the city is slated to receive over $20 billion in federal assistance related to the pandemic. That's $20 billion. Just a fact going back to 9/11, the tragedy of 9/11, when Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton was able to convince President Bush to also commit $20 billion during that tragic time. Now we receive yet another $20 billion in federal assistance. Now the city spent $6.2 billion under the COVID response and recovery efforts in fiscal year 2021. You've seen that spending through the mayor's press conferences. The response and the recovery spending continues in the current fiscal year. And we project that we're going to be spending over $7 billion. Now, what do we do with that $7 billion? Well, much of the stimulus funded spending is really for vaccination and other public health efforts. We also are trying to spend this money for recovery efforts in schools. We need to provide assistance to renters and small businesses and overall budget relief. The mayor's budget also uses stimulus funds for several ongoing initiatives, such as universal 3K, mental health in schools, senior services, overhead reimbursement for our nonprofit social service providers. People think that city agencies provide services. We actually contract with social service providers. They actually do the on-the-ground work in so many aspects of the city. Now, these programs are going to be important in helping to create a more equitable city. And this is the promise for the future, the way this money is spent. So one thing that I do want to emphasize to all of you, and I've said this repeatedly to the mayor and any budget watchdogs, I want to emphasize that stimulus money is what they call a one-shot. You get it once and then it's gone. So that means the budget and the financial plan does leave me concerned about our ability to keep the long-term promises the city's made with short-term funds. So when you talk about school programs, expanding 3K, how we're going to help with renters, how we're going to programmatically deal with the crisis at hand, we have to have an ongoing savings plan to match the spending plan so that we can sustain these services that New Yorkers are going to want and need in the future. This is the challenge that this next mayor is going to have, because as things stand, we've done very little in this administration to bring back our reserves, up to the level that I've long recommended of at least 12% of city fund spending. This has been my fight with the city council and the mayor. Even in good times, you have to save, or more importantly, when you got a lot of money, skim a little off the top so that you can save for the future. So this is going to be a challenge for the new mayor, the new controller, and the city council. Now, there are some other challenges going forward. And again, stimulus money, one shot. But here's what we have to start to think about. All the city contracts with its labor unions have either expired or are going to expire within the next year. The mayor will have to negotiate new contracts and find the money to pay for them. DC 37, I think his contract is already expired. UFD going to expire. These workers need to be paid. There's going to have to be a pattern established for those negotiations, but that comes like now, and we need money to sustain those contracts. Now, the city has a very large capital program. Believe it or not, it's $147 billion over the next 10 years. And we're going to need, we're going to need some assistance there. We've got rising interest rates and possibly lower tax revenues. So we have to manage carefully the capital plan, because this is how we build our parks and all the things that you see under construction. That's the capital plan. One thing I do want to mention is our recovery faces risks and uncertainties. Now we are poised for a full reopening, but we're not out of the woods yet. How many office workers will commute in Midtown and Lower Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn every day? We don't know. When will visitors come back to the city for business and tourism? And how will Wall Street continue its record earnings run? All of these have big question marks. Most of all, when are the jobs going to come back for New Yorkers and bring unemployment back down towards the historic low we reached before the pandemic? That's a critical question for the well-being of our city. Jobs are not coming back as fast as they are around the country, and we have to deal with that fundamental question. In the short term, the priority must be the businesses and communities across the city that have been hit hardest by the shutdown. We have got to make sure that our streets and our commercial corridors are clean and well maintained to encourage foot traffic. We have to create more high quality parks and green spaces so our kids have a place to go. We've got to work hand in hand with communities to drive real public safety strategies that are effective and are just. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. We need a police strategy and we need a justice strategy. If we can merge the two, New York City wins. And that means the way to approach this is to invest in the new economy. We need to talk more about tech and healthcare, and we can't find enough workers to fill those jobs. So that means we need to train our workers a whole new way of thinking about workforce development. That has to be in place right now. The mayor wants to be, paid in Bitcoin. Okay. But that means we have to have a better understanding of the blockchain and where that is going to be, whether that can and should be part of our economic revitalization. But I do think one thing we all agree on, we've got to invest in high-speed broadband so that no child is ever again caught on the wrong side of the digital divide. You all know what happened during the school year a year ago. The kids who had broadband and iPads and resources and parents, they got their education pretty much without interruption. But there's a whole group of children that did not have access to what they needed. And we've got to find those kids and help nurture them along so they don't fall behind. I want to bring up just something that's on all of our minds, and that's we've got to shore up our climate resiliency. We got to make sure our sea level is ready for the challenges of climate change. And we got to make sure that good governance is the bedrock of the fiscal foundation we're building for this city. My office has repeatedly called out the city's lack of transparency regarding its spending since the beginning of the pandemic. You should know that in March of 2020, think back then, the mayor signed Executive Order 101 to suspend checks and balances and allow the city to buy and spend without the oversight that is mandated in the city charter. That was an emergency power the mayor granted so that he could move swiftly and quickly to deal with resources for the pandemic. And I certainly understand that. But we also have to understand that that emergency power, the city entered into $6.9 billion in contracts without any scrutiny or public oversight by my office. And as the city's fiscal watchdog, my office has examined some of these contracts. Millions of dollars spent on ventilators that were never delivered, N95 masks that weren't actually N95 masks. Other critical supplies never materialized. And that is something that we have to look at because we can't go forward without looking at where the spending occurred and whether all of it was in the public interest. Now, I took the city of New York to Supreme Court to reestablish the checks and balances that guard against waste and abuse. They didn't voluntarily give me back my powers. I had to go take them back. And I understand with all of you dealing with so many issues in your job and careers, I know you don't think a lot about procurement. It's not something that people are going to rally in the streets for. It's not exciting, but it's the very heart of good government and a strong economy. We need to get our own house in order to correct the inequities exposed by the pandemic. So look, what we're facing today is a defining moment for our city. I think it's an exciting moment for all of you on this call today, because you know this is where it counts. This is where your brain power, your activism is going to be needed. I'm hoping that all of you, the next generation, you have an obligation to the generation that will come after you. And I've got skin in the game, so I'm rooting for you, because I have a 10-year-old and an 8.5-year-old in the public school system, and you're going to have to shepherd them and all the children to their own careers and their own education. So I am actually hoping you do well. So that's the sort of the brief numbers crunching. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Great, thank you so much, Comptroller Stringer. That was very interesting. I have a number of questions. I'm a policy budget wonk over here at OMB, so if some of them get too in the weeds, let me know. But I think you had touched on this in your presentation, but can you give us some of the biggest risks that you see facing the next mayor for the budget? What exactly do you think is sort of day one things that need to be taken care of in order to prevent any potential budget calamity that may be on the horizon?
Look, Shane, I worry about the high unemployment rate. It's 9.4% among in the Black community. It's up to 12%. When you compare it nationally, 4.5% is nationally. So the challenge really, and this has to be done very carefully, is to make sure that the one-time stimulus money is used wisely. It's so easy to frick this money away, not thinking about how you take stimulus and then try to make it a multiplier over many years to make it part of the budget. Preston Niblock, who's on the call today, who's our deputy controller for budget, if Eric Adams was smart, he'd be talking to him every day. You need to have the best minds to come together and say, okay, how do I make a program last? And that is our challenge, because this money is going to go away. The other thing is, we got labor contracts to deal with, right? We have to, figure out agreements and raises for 350,000 city workers. That's a challenge. But remember, a lot of these workers were the frontline workers. They were the people who sacrificed. They came to work. They did the city's business. We would not have survived without them. So that's a priority as well. So those are the two I would identify in the beginning.
Great. So you talked a little bit about revenue and you talked about spending. So that leads me to my next question about savings and PEG programs that have been historical in the past. Your office has done a great job over the 8 years you've been in office regarding audits of city agencies. So can you speak to any savings ideas that you've generated from those audits and any recommendations you would have for the next administration to look at where we could reduce the budget?
Shane, 8 years goes fast, but we've done like 500 audits and investigations during my time. And we identified over $1 billion in potential savings or revenues, cost avoidance measures. Like if all of our recommendations were to be implemented, that's $1 billion. So we got to do a better job counting our money. We have to make sure that we claim more Medicaid dollars at the DOE. We have to make sure we're not paying out tax benefits to dead people. We do that, we pay dead people benefits. And I think that's something that has to change. So one of the ways to do that is for the city and the controller's office to get together. Part of the challenge I had is when I audited the city agencies, they didn't understand that it was to benefit them, right? So it was that natural give and take between we hate the controller and we're out to get the mayor. Maybe the next iteration of this can be a little bit more collaborative, right? And if that happens, you can identify savings and you can stretch programs in a difficult financial time.
As somebody that works at OMB, I appreciate not being the only agency being hated for providing a strict oversight of agencies. So that's good to hear that the hate is spread around to other people as well.
Yes.
You had mentioned that we were going to have a basically brand new government coming in. What are some pieces of advice that you would give to the next comptroller?
Well, I have to tell you, I've enjoyed this transition period. People keep asking me, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I keep saying nothing until we can get this transition finished. But Brad Lander and his team are building a very strong office, building on some of what we've done. And he's also going to bring in some fresh ideas, such as trying to track in a meaningful way all that federal money that has to be accounted for. So I'm very hopeful for his administration. My advice for Brad is going to be left in a note in the desk of the controller's office. You know, the great tradition of presidents leaving that very personal letter to the next president. I take this very seriously, the time I was borough president, through the time I'm controller, and I'm starting to put my thoughts together for the next controller of New York City.
Well, my next question literally was, will you leave a note? So you preempted me on that one. So that was pretty good.
I will leave a note. No one will ever know it unless unless someone foils it, which maybe they can. I better be careful.
That's a very good point. So I think that my next question is about your background. So you didn't necessarily come into this office with having a huge amount of financial experience. You were never a CFO of a company. Can you tell us how you sort of learned on the fly how to be the CFO of a $100 billion organization, some of the growing pains and some things that you would recommend for young professionals to learn along the way to help them when they enter public life in such a fashion?
It's the job of controller is multifaceted. So the real, I think, strength of a controller is in the overall management of a diverse agency. Yes, you certainly need to understand the finances of the city. You need to understand the finances of the state, but you also need to have an understanding of how to move a bureaucracy that has 788 excellent employees, managing a $200 billion pension fund, registering 30,000 contracts, doing hundreds of audits. And that's just half the job, right? Any one of those jobs could be a full-time agency. So part of what we were able to bring, having served as borough president, is one, we actually served on the pension fund for years. And as my time in borough president, we had an incredible policy shop where we did 50 reports on financial issues, management issues in city agencies, something I was always interested in. So that by the time we got to the controller's office, we had a very strong structure and knew what to do to build an incredible office. What I did not anticipate, I knew the people I was going to bring from the borough president's office were going to be excellent. But when I arrived at the controller's office, there were hundreds and hundreds of people who were just the consummate city government workers, union workers, people who just couldn't wait for direction and to work with us. And the accomplishments we made in this office are truly amazing. Think about this. They told me we couldn't divest from fossil fuel, right? In the greatest climate moment in our history. And we have finished our divestment, or we will finish the divestment by December or January or February, but we've already divested $4 billion. It's never been done before. We were able to double our green investment in this city. That was never done before. We worked on issues related to women and minority-owned businesses, challenged city agencies to make sure that we have to recognize that we're basically, we budget as male, pale, and stale government leaders with no diversity. And you can't grow an economy unless you're investing in women and minority-owned businesses. We hired the city's first chief diversity officer. And I could go on, but the secret sauce in all of this, the way we were able to do it, was not because of me. It was because of the people who I was able to bring into government. And that's what I would say to people. There are elected officials that want very much to make a difference, and they need people like you and others to stand with them and partner with them on the big issues. People say to me, well, what's Eric Adams' greatest challenge after he becomes mayor? And I say that we all know the greatest challenge. The most important thing he can do right now is build a transition that gives him great capacity. The reason I was able to do all the things as controller is I had capacity. I could rival the mayoral administration. I could do my own work. And that's because I was able to build capacity. Adams has to build capacity. Hopefully some of you would consider being part of the city government. But that is where you all come in, your brains, your talent. And by the way, not everyone has to just be a staffer. I started out as a staffer for Jerry Nadler, who's now a congressman, when I was, starting out. And it was the greatest experience because I happened to, work for a guy who was honest and transparent and would go on to, save the country. And you got to hook up with the right people who are going to do the right thing for the city. And then it's a great mentorship that I believe in.
And a special shout out to Steve Corson. He was my intern supervisor in the policy shop. So I agree that you guys put out some of the finest policy papers in the city. So
no, he's terrific. I mean, him and I have, we're Jet fans, so we have that in common over the years. So
sorry about that.
It's a very tragic time for us, as usual.
You had mentioned the pension and how you divested from fossil fuels, and earlier you had mentioned the blockchain. Has there been any conversation about investments into the blockchain through the pension fund?
No, and there's a lot of issues related to Bitcoin and a lot of this economy. Is it real? Is it feasible? Does it have a real impact on our environment? But having identified all of those challenges, you can't close your eyes and put your head in the sand. The next controller, the next mayor is going to have to look at all of these issues. And I think this was not something that was under our watch, but it's definitely over the next 10, 20 years. This is going to be, we're going to have many forums on this, and I'm learning every day. But I think there's a lot of people out there who can, talk to us about it. It's complicated.
Very much so. Yeah, I've been looking into it, and I can't wrap my head around it. So I would imagine that we'll have to bring in some of the policy.
So you haven't bought it. No one's bought an NFT, or all right? No,
not on my
yet.
side. No, no. And so you mentioned one shots coming from the federal government and sometimes the state government as well. Do you see other big revenue opportunities in the city that don't require federal or state approval that we can access to spend funding?
There are honestly very few revenue opportunities that don't need Albany, approval. The most likely, as is you can review fees for services charged by agencies, and you can update those, but that's like $1 million, a couple $1 million at most. That's not going to change anything. Any changes, it's there's got to be that Albany relationship, and again, we have to reestablish that relationship and nurture it, and that's kind of what's going to happen.
Great. And then you mentioned not registering some of the contracts that were proposed to you from this administration. Can you take us through the thought process of your office on when you decide on not registering one of the contracts?
Well, first of all, so just so everyone knows, like in fiscal year 20, we had something like 19,000 contract actions, and 93% were registered in the same fiscal year, meaning they come in, they go out. But contracts are returned for a variety of reasons, and they're generally to allow the agency more time to answer questions. The challenge for this administration was they just did not dot the I and cross the T. And people may think, well, that's ministerial, but when you don't dot the I and cross the T, that's how municipal scandals happen. And I've been around long enough to remember the municipal scandals, in the 80s under Koch, and various scandals along the way. When you stop taking a microscope to the kind of submissions, and that's when the trouble has started. And we have been vigilant in exposing those issues in various city agencies. People were never happy with us for doing it, but we did it because that's our job. You need oversight. There's a lot, I think, that can happen in terms of contract registration that can be smoother. And it starts with the city agencies. I think the next commissioner of MOCs or Mayor's Office of Contracts will be an important appointment. Again, no one thinks about the procurement, right? Who do we want to know about? We want to know who the police commissioner is going to be, right? We wanted to know when Banks was going to be schools chancellor. But the Mayor's Office of Contracts is a critical component or a critical part of the overall budget process, and I hope we can see some real improvement.
And if you want to learn more about what Comptroller Stringer was talking about, City for Sale is a great book to understand exactly how procurement can go wrong in the 80s. So I highly recommend that to everybody.
And by the way, everyone, everyone during the pandemic, including myself, had the Power Broker on their bookshelves for TV appearances. But you're right, Cities for Sale is a chronicle of what happens when you take the foot off the transparency button, right? And we have to get back to that, and that's the job of the next controller and a robust city council. We need hearings, and we need oversight, and we need back and forth. And I think that makes you a better mayor when you know you're going to have to come to all of these different places and make the case.
Excellent. This question might be a little wonky, but there's been a number of alternative funding mechanisms, such as Hudson Yards and East Midtown, coming to realization to build some of these mega projects. Do you think this is a good for the city budget, or do you think that the tax revenue should go into the general fund, allowing the public to sort of oversee it a little bit more easily?
Look, to the extent that these special purpose funding mechanisms help develop or revitalize areas of the city that could be good for the city and the people, I wouldn't have a blanket no to it. I think so long as the actual cost to the city, if there is one, is transparent and clearly spelled out. That wasn't the case with Amazon. That was a deal in secret, and that's what enraged so many people. But I do think, look, when you have controversial development issues, when you have controversial finance issues, always err on the side of transparency. That's how we were able to get Columbia expansion done when we were Shane in the borough president's office. That was not easy. Fordham University expansion was not easy. Even having a conversation about NYU was not easy. But if you're transparent in what you want to accomplish and work with the community, we can get things done here. The Amazon example was not going forward what we're going to get, and I think it cost the city dearly in terms of what we were able to do afterwards.
We have a question from Morgan, and the question is, what issues do you think young professionals in government should be paying most attention to or preparing for right now?
I think a couple of things. First, how are young professionals going to work? How do you want to work? You'll have a say in that, right? This is a moment where, business, tech are looking to, find workers. This is a market for young professionals right now, and you have to sort of carve out, what you want to do. Do you want to really just work from home? Do you lose mentorship if you're home all day? Is Zoom the answer? This is all going to be discussed in the next few years, and it's going to decide the city budget. It's going to decide how we evolve as a city, and all of you are going to have a say in that. So I think we need to hear more about how you want to work, how you want your careers to be. This is going from the industrial revolutions to a service sector economy. There are going to be changes, and you want to be ahead of those changes. I also think we're going to have to decide the kind of city we want. Do we want a city for the very, very wealthy, with enclaves for the very poor, and nothing in between? We have got to get back to building a middle class for families, but we also have to have a middle class for young professionals who may have families in short order. And it really breaks my heart when someone says, I'm going to be in the city for a few years, and then we want to start a family, so we're going to look for a house, or even worse, we're going to go somewhere else. And I want to say to them, you don't want to go to Texas or Florida with the mosquitoes and the heat wave, and what a ridiculous thing to do. But if there's no housing, and the schools aren't good, parks aren't good, and the crime is too much, people will leave. And this is the greatest city on earth, and people ultimately want to be here. That's why we did a report just recently, Shane, that's showing that people are coming back. So the migration out has now flipped. Now people are coming back, as they should. But we in government could play a better role encouraging people, right, by doing the service work that's necessary.
It's so great to hear the results of that report, that people are coming back to the city, because you're absolutely right. This is the greatest place in the world, and why would anybody want to live anywhere else? So I'm totally on board with those findings. Something that I think has been on the top of a lot of people's mind on the national economy is inflation. Can you talk a little bit about what the pension system has been doing to try to combat the inflation that may harm it in the future and require more funds put in from the city?
So, the inflation of 2021, so far, I got to tell you, so far, so good. We had an amazing year in fiscal 21. We had returns of over 25%. It generated savings somewhere that drove the out year budget gaps down by 800 million for next year, $1.6 billion after that, and over 2.4 billion after that. The controller's office and the pension system and the labor trustees, man, we delivered. We delivered. And the reason we were able to deliver is 8 years earlier when I became controller, we fixed the back office of the pension fund. And then rather than have 5 separate funds operate separately, literally doing the same meetings over and over again, tying up precious resources, not giving us an opportunity to go look and travel and see our investments, we changed all that and we became one investment meeting. And that is not the only reason why we did well, but it showed that we were going to be very, very serious about our returns. Now, we're not going to see 25% this year or anytime soon, I think, but over 8 years, my job was to hit the 7% actual target rate. We exceeded it. We're at 9.1%. We have a wonderful group. Alex Donier and others on the team did a masterful job. Susanna Vickers, our trustee, and all the trustees. So I think the pension fund has actually made a tremendous contribution to the general fund. We've never seen it quite like this, and I think it's very significant.
That's great news. We have another question. I know city council is not one of the positions that you've held in the past, but when I was in your office, we put out a report about reforming the member items circumstances and the different situations in which members got their funding. And one of the questions that we have is, do members of the city council have control over how the city budget is spent within their district? And I would add on to that question, do you think that that report and your advocacy on reforming those member items, especially with Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito many years ago, do you think those reforms have taken shape and made a better process?
Well, Shane, you know too much. So that report was also to showcase Bloomberg and my good friend Speaker Quinn. I was trying to make a point that you're cutting the borough president's budgets and you're kind of not cutting your own, or there was no consistent funding mechanism. So in a give and take, we fought back with that report. But you do raise the issue of, what the council level of spending is. And while this council doesn't have direct control over city agency spending, they do have discretionary funding that amounts to a few $1 million per council district. And, it's used for various purposes. I do think there's a need for having a council member on the ground, knowing, what's the most worthwhile projects. Good council members can tell you everybody, where everybody is. Some of the candidates for speaker understand that so well. Gail Brewer, who I've known both as a borough president and now as a council member, can tell you, every block, as can assembly members and senators who from time to time have some money as well. So I do think there's a need there, but I don't think they should have control over city agencies. Again, you got to be transparent. We have a larger city with needs that are not just parochial.
I would definitely agree with that. Could you go over sort of the structure of the budget a little bit more? We have a question here: is what is the largest contributor to the budget? Maybe talk about different payments that are discretionary versus non-discretionary, debt service. Sort of give a broader outline of where you see how this $100 billion plus of money is being spent across the city.
Well, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but the biggest contributor to the budget I can tell you is the property tax, $30 billion. It's, I think, roughly 30% of the total budget. And that, that comes from our office buildings, apartment buildings. We have, I think, $16 billion in social service spending. Obviously, we talked about education spending. Just those three items, is most of the budget. And a lot of people think, well, you're going to have a new mayor or a new city council, and they have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, or billions of dollars to spend. It's not true. And again, I don't have the data, but it's worth taking a look at, or bringing in a speaker to talk to you about this. There's very little move money. By the time you're dealing with the things you must spend money on, or the things the state and the federal government tell you to spend money on, there isn't a lot for big programs, right? So you have to come in to office understanding the budget and what you want to accomplish that's quote unquote new. And that's why this moment is so important, because we happen to have an influx of federal dollars that are one shot. So how do you turn that one shot into a program that's going to last, hopefully, for a very long time? That's going to be the challenge. That's going to be the challenge.
That makes total sense. This is going to be the last call for questions. We have one or two more questions left. So if you have that burning question to ask the comptroller, please put it into the chat now, and we'll make sure to get it answered. We have another question about how can young professionals get more involved in the budget scenario. Can you talk a little bit about participatory budgeting? Do you think that's something that's the wave of the future? Do you think it's something that it makes a meaningful impact? I know that the dollars aren't a great amount, but at least in my community on the Upper West Side, Helen Rosenthal has done a very good job of getting public input into which programs should get funded. So do you think this is something that should be expanded? Do you think it's meaningful in its impact?
I don't think, I think it's not discretionary operating money, right? So it's capital dollars. I sometimes worry that the best organized schools, best organized within a community, end up getting the dollars. And it feels good, but I'm not sure it's a driver for social change. I wouldn't change it. It gives council members something to do in the district, which I think is helpful, and people learn about it. If you want to get involved, though, the way to engage is to get, the borough president to appoint you to the community board, to participate in a local community organization. I think, I just give you a little history. I was the first teenager in the history of New York City to be appointed to a community board. It made the front page below the fold of the New York Times when the borough president, then Percy Sutton, appointed me and another young man. And it changed my life, because I was suddenly, a very junior, voting member of a community board that left a lasting impression on me. I mean, I took it very seriously, because here I am today. But I think it's a wonderful way for young people to start engaging. And what happens? You talk to other city agencies, because you're on the community board. Many people who join community boards run for office and win. So their original starting point was the community board. And I think that's a way to do it. Or do what you did, Shane, which I think is very helpful. And, this is what I did as well. I was lucky to get a job with Jerry Nadler a billion years ago. But, you intern in the borough president's office or the controller's office. Those are real internships. And then you end up at OMB, and suddenly the budget inside out, and you haven't even started your career for real yet, right? So I think these are all great avenues for people. And look, there's nothing. What I would say to all of you is, working on Wall Street is lucrative and making money. Nothing wrong with that. But there is nothing like the give and take of government, the back and forth, the fast pace. And the fact is that when at the end of the day, you did something to help somebody. And that's very rewarding over time. I'm not saying people shouldn't make money, but there's also other opportunities out there.
That's fantastic. And I think you're totally right that public service is one of the preeminent ways to have a career and really give back to our communities and make sure that the government is serving the people in a way that we all think is meaningful and impactful.
Now, running for office isn't easy.
Well, I tried to get on a community board on the Upper West Side, and they said there's about one slot open out of the 50 to get on, and there was about a couple hundred applicants. So the community board approach, depending on your neighborhood, might not be the easiest solution.
Ouch, ouch.
As well.
Okay, fair criticism. New borough presidents who are listening in, listen. You can't have young people participate if you're not willing to make room. So that's fair.
Let's get some new blood in there. We have a lightning round question that has been submitted. One of the questions is that your family's avid travelers. What's on the bucket list when world travel is back open, or do you have anything that is on the top of your mind on where you want to go?
Once it's truly safe, wherever my little kids' chess games take them, Florida. I think we're slated for Ohio. God help me. I'm going on my vacation. Ohio for the national championship chess, and that's where I will be going.
Certainly exotic locales that you've picked out for your next vacation.
It's all what they got through the campaign, so it's their time now. So I'll send you postcards from the Ohio national championships.
I'm looking forward to that in the mail. What's your dream job that you you have not had yet?
Well, I think that was pretty obvious. We'll see what the future holds, but that was the dream job.
Do you have any inkling on where your next position may be? You want to make some news today and let us know, are you just going to be a traveler to Ohio, or do you have bigger things in store?
Well, look, I love public service. I love government. I love contributing to the city. I'm not trying to be, just campaigny, but with my two little kids, I really have a renewed skin in this game, and it's called New York City. And I'm going to do everything I can to help this administration, help these kids, all the children of the city, and I have a lot to offer. I hope people believe that, and that's what I'm going to do. In terms of specifically what I'm going to do, I'll be honest with you. We are literally transferring a $200 billion pension fund, $100 million budget, hundreds of employees. After 8 years plus 8 years as borough president, I've got 16 years of just stuff that we have to do. So we've had this great partnership with Comptroller Lander, and I want to finish that. It means a lot to me that we have a transition. I want him to think that on day one, I did my part for him in the city. And then after that, we'll do some thinking and come back and, hopefully I'll get invited again if I have something worthwhile to do or talk about. And I'd love to do that. ABNY is, I think I'm going to spend more time with Melva and Stephen and ABNY and all of you, because I think it's an organization that needs to continue and really be a part of the debate here, just like it was in the 70s and 80s. This is a great organization.
If anybody deserves a vacation, it's you, after all the public service that you've given us. And really,
well, there are chess tournaments. There are chess tournaments in warmer climates in, Florida or whatever. So I'm checking out the hotels. Yes.
Maybe Hawaii has one that you could hit up. Dinner with somebody living or dead?
So the best thing I like to do is go out to dinner with my wife Elise. We've had a crisis of babysitters, so that is being resolved now, so we can get back out there and be part of New York City. But we've had to take a little break, to be honest.
And where would you go for dinner? Is there an Upper West Side restaurant recommendation that you can give me on a place that I could find you on any given Friday night? I don't want to tell you specifically, because there are some really great restaurants. So I'm not going to tell you our locations, but if you call me, I'll give you private recommendations. Okay.
You don't want you don't want to say one and you didn't go to the other one. It's a problem.
We don't want to blow up your spot with reservations either. I know some of these places are hard to get into. So if you make a recommendation, the entire ABNY Young Professionals might be there on a Friday night taking your table.
If that was true, that would change the direction of what I would decide to do for a living. if I had that juice.
What's your favorite part of New York City?
The greatest, for me, the greatest part of New York City is the neighborhoods that are new to explore. The one great thing about running for citywide office, like multiple times, I ran like 3 or 4 times citywide, so I was able to travel the subways, the buses, the walkways, the boardwalks, from Snug Harbor in Staten Island to Coney Island with the kids to, shaking hands and meeting all different people. I mean, you can go into Brooklyn and it's, every place is like the United Nations, and it never gets old. And so I just love that that give and take. It's why I've enjoyed running for office, because of the different places you end up and the different people you meet. It's a true journey, and it's a worldwide journey right here in New York City.
And I love the campaign ads that you were running that really showed that that's what touched you, and you were bringing your kids around the city and showing them. So it was a reflection on what you actually mean to the city and what the city means to you. So
I appreciate it. And by the way, the ads were the ads were really amazing. And right now, post campaign, for the last 6 months, my wife and I, kids, we go out in the street. People, of course, tell me that they voted for me. So I've now added up votes. I actually won this race, but
I know, funny how that happens.
No, it's the I love New Yorkers. Like, people, and I know people are hugging and people are wonderful. But the stars, when people come running up to the kids and they say, "Oh my God, you were adorable. You were great in the commercials," and they all, they've moved on. So they're like, "Huh?" But they're surrounded by people, so it's been a lot of fun reconnecting with the voters and New Yorkers. They did like the ads.
And I think we have one final question to ask you. This is from Daniel. City council legislation can be complicated, but also vague. What is your approach to handling enforcement duties handed to your office through legislation that may not be completely spelled out?
That is a great question to end on, because a lot of there are some, I just remember some council members who would do or say the stupidest things about the controller's office, having no idea what exactly we do, but wanting to introduce legislation in the hope that they'd be mentioned on Twitter for a moment. But that's par for the course. I was probably like them when I was in the assembly, and the next controller just has to smile and go to the city council and just tell them to stay in their lane. And we did that pretty effectively.
As a recent law school graduate, I will say that attorneys will help in that matter, making sure that any ambiguity in the law is fully fleshed out with some opinion letters that I'm sure that you've asked for over.
Shane, you are on your way to being budget director. I am very impressed with this today.
The problem is I'm not very good at math, so we'll see whether
it's overrated.
That's my feeling about it too. That is it for the Q&A. Comptroller Stringer, do you have any final closing thoughts that you want to say before we kick it over to Sarah and the rest of the ABNY team?
Well, let me thank you and Sarah and Melva, who I've admired for such a long time in building ABNY. And just so all of you know, Stephen Rubenstein and I have known each other since we were just starting out in government and politics. I was a young assemblyman introducing a bill that would allow for pets in public housing. And Stephen was a young public relations person who was doing pro bono work to make sure that we could have pets in public housing. And we had this huge press conference that Stephen put together. It was unbelievable. I'm like 30 years old, and there it is. Every TV station in the world is there because pets bring TV cameras. It was wild. I couldn't believe that Stephen Rubenstein is like a genius. And then we bring out, the ASPCA brings out like the biggest dog I've ever seen and proceeds to bite one of the reporters. It was like, what a way to begin. But that's how we started our friendship. And he is a great leader of this city. So stay close to him.
I will echo that I've made so many great friends through ABNY YP. And I just encourage everybody to get more involved. If you're already involved, do more. It really helps drive the city be a better place. It's literally in the name of the organization. So it's a great resource for everybody, and you get to hear some of the top policymakers in the city, like Comptroller Stringer, come and give us their thoughts on a morning like this. And I just want to thank everybody involved. And with that, I will hand it over to Sarah to close us out.
Thank you so much, Shane. And thank you so much, Comptroller Stringer. We really appreciate it. And it's such a treat to have you on this December morning. We're so grateful for the budget briefing. I know I speak for everyone when I say I really learned so much. And we're so happy to have you, and we really, really appreciate it. So thank you so much for joining us. You're a great supporter of ABNY, and we really appreciate you. And Shane, thank you for being such a great moderator. Congratulations on graduation and the bar and all that great stuff. So this concludes our policy briefing. Thank you again, Comptroller Stringer. We can't thank you enough. So have a great.
Thank you.